Taeyong swayed, her fingers digging into Jungkook's shoulders as she tried to maintain her balance on the mattress. She offered him a lopsided, tipsy pout, her eyes narrowing into what she clearly thought was a menacing, intimidating glare. "No, no," she mumbled, shaking her head so hard that her hair flew in every direction. "That's too easy. You can't just say, 'You love me,' and get away with it after being a big, mean monster." She wobbled, pulling herself up to her full height on the bed. She pointed a shaky finger directly at his nose, her expression turning adorably stern. "The punishment is different," she declared, trying to sound authoritative but ending up sounding breathlessly cute. "You have to dance for me, just like in the garden. You have to be my partner again, right here, right now. And you have to spin me a big spin like a hurricane." Jungkook looked at her, his heart swelling so much it felt like it might burst. He could see the stubborn glint in her eyes, the way she was demanding to reclaim the moment that had been stolen by their fight. He slowly stood, up on the mattress, towering over her, his hands still firmly holding her waist, to keep her steady. "A hurricane, huh?" he whispered, his voice dark and playful. "Yes," she insisted, throwing her arms up. "And if you don't do it perfectly, you're in more trouble, Mr. Chun." Jungkook chuckled, the sound vibrating through the small space between them. He didn't need music. He could hear the faint echo of the orchestral track from the garden in his mind. He took her hands, interlacing their fingers, and pulled her toward him until the fabric of her blood-red sari brushed against the dark material of his sherwani. He didn't waste a second. With a fluid, practiced motion, he raised their joint, hands high above their heads. "Ready?" he murmured, locking eyes with her. Taeyong giggled, a bright, bubbly sound of pure anticipation, and nodded vigorously. He spun her. As she twirled, the red silk flared out in a dramatic crimson circle, catching the dim lamplight. She laughed, her head thrown back, her hair swirling around her flushed, beautiful face. She looked like she was finally shedding the heavy, suffocating weight of the day, spinning away all the anger and the tears. Jungkook watched her, his grip firm and sure. He didn't let her drift away. He caught her mid-turn, pulling her back against his chest with a sharp, magnetic force. The collision was soft and electric, her back pressing into him as he held her close, his arms wrapping around her waist to anchor her. He leaned down, whispering against her ear, his breath warm and ticklish. "Is the punishment sufficient, or does the captain of the party require another round?" Taeyong leaned her head back against his shoulder, her eyes closed, a slow, satisfied smile spreading across her face. "One more," she whispered, her voice soft and heavy with affection. "One more, and then you're officially forgiven." Taeyong didn't wait for him to initiate the second spin. The moment his grip loosened, she giggled and hopped off the edge of the bed, her feet hitting the hardwood floor with a soft thud. The sudden movement caused the already chaotic drape of her sari to shift further. The heavy red fabric slipped completely off her shoulder, pooling at her elbow and leaving her neck and chest shockingly exposed. Taeyong didn't wait for him to catch his breath. With a sudden, clumsy burst of energy, she jumped off the bed, her feet hitting the floor with a soft thud. She began to wander aimlessly around the bedroom, her hands waving in the air as she continued her tipsy, nonsensical monologue. "The dance was good," she muttered to the curtains, "but the judge, that's mean, needs more evidence." The trial of Chun Jungkook is still in session. Every time she turned, the red sari already hanging by a thread shifted dangerously. The front of her blouse, cut in a deep, daring neckline, had fallen even lower, leaving her chest and the curve of her cleavage completely exposed to the warm bedroom light. As she stumbled, the fabric at her waist slipped further, revealing the smooth, pale expanse of her skin. She was a mess of disheveled elegance, completely unaware of the effect she was having. Jungkook was standing by the bed, his knuckles white as he gripped the post. His restraint, which he had been holding together by a thread, was snapping. Watching her, so soft, so exposed, and so utterly oblivious, was torture. The sight of her bare skin, combined with the way she was swaying, made his vision blur. Every instinct he possessed screamed at him to close the distance, to pull her into his arms, and to stop her from moving in such a dangerous, intoxicating way. Taeyoung stopped near the vanity mirror and turned back to face him, a mischievous glint in her heavy-lidded eyes. "Hey," she called out, pointing a finger at him. "The punishment isn't over. Yet, Mr. Monster, you haven't finished your tasks." She stumbled slightly, and Jungkook instinctively lunged forward to steady her, his hands hovering inches from her waist, afraid that if he touched her, he wouldn't be able to let go. "You have to pick me up," she demanded, her voice dropping to a sweet, intoxicating whisper. She held out her arms, her posture swaying, and then, "You have to say I love you 10 times. Not once, not twice, 10 times. And you have to mean it every single time." Jungkook didn't answer. He didn't even try to fight the urge anymore. The need to hold her, to possess her, and to drown out all the previous arguments with his own devotion was all that mattered. He stepped into her space, his eyes dark with a hunger he had been starving all day. Without a word, he scooped her up into his arms, bridal style. Taeyoung gasped, her arms immediately flying up to lock around his neck, her face burying into the crook of his shoulder. She felt weightless, and the friction of her soft skin against his arms made him hiss in a sharp, controlled breath. As he walked toward the center of the room, he leaned down, his lips brushing against her ear, his voice a low, gravelly vibration that sent shivers down her spine. "One," he whispered, his grip tightening as he felt her tremble. "I love you." He took another step, his gaze locked onto hers as he began the count. Each one a desperate, bruising promise meant to erase the memory of the monster he had been, and to claim her entirely as his own, too. "I love you." Jungkook didn't stop walking, his steady, purposeful gait carrying them deeper into the sanctuary of their bedroom. His voice was a low, rhythmic mantra. Against the shell of her ear, each word heavy with the weight of his regret, and his raw, unyielding devotion. "3," he murmured, his gaze dropping to the soft curve of her exposed shoulder, where the fabric of her sari had slipped even further. "I love you." Taeyoung shivered, her hands tangling into the hair at the nape of his neck, pulling him closer. She felt small and protected in his arms, the heady scent of his cologne mixing with the lingering sweetness of the wine. "4," he continued, his thumb tracing a slow, burning circle against them, small of her back where her skin was bare and hot to his touch. "I love you." "5," he whispered, his lips grazing her temple, his heart hammering against her chest like a drum. "I love you." He reached the center of the room, but he didn't put her down. He couldn't. The contact, the way her leg brushed against his hip, the way her breath hitched every time he spoke, was unraveling him. "6," he said, his voice dropping an octave, deeper and more possessive. "I love you." "7," he breathed, stopping to look down at her. Her eyes were hazy, her lips parted, and she looked at him with such absolute, drunken trust that it made his vision swim. "I love you." He shifted his weight, his arms tightening around her, pulling her so flush against him that there was no space left between them. The blood-red sari was now a tangled mess around them, a beautiful, ruined boundary that he longed to push away entirely. 8, he whispered against her lips, his breath mingling with hers. "I love you." 9, he added, his voice barely a tremor now, his control hanging by the thinnest of threads. "I love you." He paused for a heartbeat, his forehead resting against hers. The room felt like It was shrinking, the rest of the world fading into nothingness until there was only the heat of her skin and the frantic, syncopated rhythm of their breathing. 10. He finally murmured, the words soft, reverent, and absolute. I love you. Jungkook leaned in, his lips inches from hers, but just as he moved to seal the promise, Taeyoung's hands pressed firmly against his chest. She gave him a surprisingly strong, sudden shove, her eyes wide with a playful, tipsy glint. Taeyoung, wait, stop, put me down, you giant. I'm the judge and the trial isn't quite over. Jungkook stumbled back a step, caught completely off guard. He set her down. On her feet, his hands still hovering near her waist, his chest heaving as he tried to recalibrate. Taeyoung didn't stand still. She broke free from his hold with a nimble, swaying grace and darted toward the other side of the room. She tripped slightly on her. Oh, I'm sorry, let out a loud, bubbly laugh and turned back to face him, her hair a wild, beautiful halo around her face. Taeyoung, you completed it. 10 times. You said it, you big, grumpy monster. But you're not allowed to just skip to the kissing part. I have to deliberate on the verdict. She started spinning around the room, her red sari swirling like a storm, laughing as she dodged the vanity chair. Taeyoung, you're fast, Kook, but the judge is elusive. If you want to finish this trial, you're going to have to catch me first. Jungkook stood in the center of the room, his pulse still racing, his hands clenched at his sides. He watched her flushed skin, the erratic, graceful movements, the way she was finally, truly laughing. The frustration he felt at being pushed away vanished, replaced by a surge of pure, raw adoration. He took a slow, deliberate step toward her, a slow, predatory smile spreading across his face. Jungkook. Oh, the judge is elusive, is she? We'll see about that. He started to stalk toward her, his movements controlled and steady, his eyes locked onto her swaying form. The room was no longer a cage of arguments. It was a playground, and he knew exactly how this game was going to end. Taeyoung giggled, her feet stumbling as she darted past the edge of the bed and made a beeline for the open balcony doors. The crisp, cool night air of Seoul rushed in to meet her, billowing the heavy silk of her sari and making. The red fabric looked like a flame against the sparkling, dark city skyline. Taeyoung, you can't catch me, Kook. I'm faster than the wind in the city. She stepped out onto the marble floor of the balcony, her arms outstretched, spinning in a circle as she looked up at the distant skyscraper lights. With the moon bathing her, the disarray of her outfit was even more apparent. Neckline of her blouse had dipped dangerously low, and the sheer volume of her movement meant the sari was barely clinging to her form, leaving her waist and back completely bare to the night. Jungkook's expression darkened instantly. He stopped at the threshold of the room, his voice dropping into a sharp, protective command that rippled with intensity. Jungkook, Tia, don't go out there, baby. Come back inside. Taeyoung spun around, a playful, defiant pout on her lips. Taeyoung, why? Are you scared of the city lights? Jungkook took a swift, firm step toward her, his eyes scanning the quiet, dark terrace below to ensure they were truly alone. He reached the balcony and pulled her back toward the safety of the bedroom, his hands gripping her shoulders with a possessive, grounding force. Jungkook, someone will see you, and this entire sinful look, it is only for me to see, not the city, not the neighbors, and certainly not the staff. He pinned her gently against the balcony doorframe, the shadow of his tall frame shielding her from the outside world. He looked down at the way her breath was hitching, his gaze traveling over her exposed skin with a hunger that made her shiver. Taeyoung, you're being grumpy again, she whispered, though her eyes softened, the playfulness in them turning into something deeper and more compliant. Jungkook, I'm not being grumpy, Taeyoung. I'm being a husband who is losing his mind. He leaned in close, his voice a low vibration against her skin. Jungkook, your punishment for running away is going to be much harsher than the first one. Just as Jungkook moved to pull her fully into the shadows of the room, Taeyoung gave a breathless, intoxicating laugh. With a quick, slippery motion, she twisted out of his grip, her bangles chiming as she danced backward, out of his reach. Taeyoung, you're too slow, Mr. Monster. If you want to give me a harsher punishment, you're going to have to do a lot better than that. She turned on her heel and darted back into the room, her red sari trailing behind her like a streak of fire. She swerved around the foot of the bed, her movements erratic but graceful, her hair whipping around her face. Jungkook let out a frustrated, sharp exhale, his patience finally snapping, but not in anger. It was the thrill of the chase. He didn't hesitate, his long legs eating up the distance between them as he gave pursuit. Taeyoung, oh, are you getting angry? Is the judge annoying you? She squealed as she felt his hand brush her waist, narrowly ducking under his arm to scramble toward the opposite side of the bed. She was flushed, breathless, and looking at him with eyes that sparkled with a reckless, drunken challenge. Jungkook, keep running, TA, he warned, his voice low and dangerous, his eyes tracking her every move with predatory focus. But when I catch you, and I will catch you, you're not leaving this bed until tomorrow morning. Taeyoung, is that a threat? She laughed, though her breath was hitching now, her confidence wavering just enough to make her stumble. She looked back at him, her lips parted and eyes blown wide, watching as he moved with a sudden, decisive burst of speed, cutting off her path to the door. Jungkook, it's a promise. Taeyoung darted toward the balcony again, thinking she had gained enough ground to pivot and run past him, but she had underestimated how quickly he could move when his patience was entirely spent. She turned sharply, her red sari swirling around her, but before she could make a break for the other side of the room, Jungkook surged forward. He didn't just walk, he intercepted her path, his frame pinning her against the cool, transparent surface of the balcony's sliding glass door. The sudden stop made her gasp. She was trapped between the glass and his solid, unyielding chest. Outside, the lights of Seoul glittered like scattered diamonds, but inside, the only thing Taeyoung could see was the darkening intensity in Jungkook's eyes. Taeyoung, oh, she breathed, the word tiny and breathless. She pressed her palms against his chest, trying to maintain a playful distance, but her fingers curled into his shirt instead. You actually caught me. Jungkook didn't move an inch. He braced his arms on either side of her head, locking her into place, his gaze burning over her face, tracing the flushed skin of her cheeks and the soft, parted line of her lips. Jungkook, I told you, didn't I? His voice was a low, rough growl, vibrating against her skin. He leaned in closer, his nose brushing against her temple, his scent sharp, masculine, and intoxicating, completely enveloping her. Taeyoung, are you going to be mean now? She looked up at him, her bravado finally wilting under the weight of his stare. Her voice was barely a whisper, a mixture of nerves and the remnants of the wine that made her head swim. Jungkook leaned down, his lips trailing a slow, agonizing path from her earlobe, down the sensitive line of her neck. He stopped just above her pulse, feeling it jumped erratically beneath his skin. Jungkook, I'm not going to be mean, Taeyoung. I'm going to be exactly what you asked for. He looked at her, his eyes molten, and the playfulness was gone, replaced by a raw, overwhelming need that made the air in the room feel thin. Jungkook, the trial is over, and the verdict is in. You're mine, and you aren't going anywhere. Without waiting for another word, he captured her lips in a deep, crushing kiss, his hands sliding from the glass to grip her waist, pulling her flush against him. so that she couldn't move, couldn't run, and couldn't think of anything but him. The glass of the balcony door hummed against their backs, cool and firm, a stark contrast to the absolute furnace of their bodies. Jungkook didn't just kiss her, he consumed her, his mouth finding hers with a desperate, starving hunger that seemed to erase every hour they had spent apart. His hands, broad and calloused, didn't settle for the fabric of her sari. Instead, they dove beneath the loose, tangled silk, his palms finding the bare, heated skin of her waist. He gripped her with an intensity that bordered on bruising, his fingers digging into her sides as if he needed to brand her, to ensure she was physically tethered to him. He pulled her so tight against him that the air left her lungs in a sharp, jagged gasp, a sound he instantly silenced with another forceful, deeper kiss. His thumbs traced the curve of her hip, his touch rough and possessive, sliding over the smooth skin of her waist until his hands were locked firmly behind the small of her back. The sensation of his hot, heavy palms against her bare flesh sent a jolt of pure electricity through her, causing her to arch into him. Instinctively, Jungkook tilted his head, deepening the angle, his tongue demanding a response that she was all too happy to give. The kiss was messy, wet, and frantic, fueled by the remnants of the whiskey on her breath and the months of unspoken tension between them. Every time she tried to pull back to breathe, his grip on her waist would tighten, his fingers splaying wide across her ribs, pulling her right back into the friction of his chest. His mouth moved from her lips to the frantic pulse jumping at the base of her throat, his teeth grazing the sensitive skin there just enough to make her whimper. He wasn't just holding her, he was anchoring her, his body acting as a wall between her and the rest of the world. He moved his hands higher, his palms dragging slowly up her sides, the friction of his touch leaving a trail of fire across her bare skin. He pressed her harder against the glass, the cool surface vibrating with the force of his devotion, his hands moving with a masterful, commanding pressure that made her legs tremble beneath her. Every movement he made was a silent, desperate vow, a claim that he was never, ever letting her go. Jungkook's hands moved with a possessive urgency, sliding from her waist to her shoulders. With a smooth, forceful motion, he spun her around, guiding her until her chest was pressed flush against the cool, transparent glass of the balcony door. He didn't give her a moment to catch her breath. He crowded her from behind, his large frame acting as a heavy, grounding weight against her back. He pinned her wrists against the glass on either side of her head, locking her into place so she could feel every inch of his hard, strained posture against her spine. He leaned down, his lips brushing the shell of her ear, his breath hot and ragged against her neck. "Jungkook, you have no idea," he rasped, his voice dropping to a low, dangerous growl that vibrated through her entire body. "You have no idea how much I've been struggling to keep my hands off you all night, watching you walk around in this blood-red sari, watching the way it barely clings to you, the way it leaves you so open, so exposed." His hand slid down from her wrists, tracing the exposed, delicate curve of her neck and shoulders before settling firmly back onto her bare waist. He squeezed, his fingers digging into her skin, his thumb dragging across the softness of her hip. "Jungkook, you look like a sin, Taeyoung. A beautiful, intoxicating, deadly sin. Do you know what you've been doing to me? Every time you moved, every time that fabric slipped, I felt like I was losing my mind." He pressed himself harder into her, his hips grinding slowly against her lower back, a deliberate, maddening friction that sent a jolt of fire straight through her core. He shifted his grip, one hand sliding up to dangerously cup her chest, his thumb teasing the edge of the silk, while the other remained a vice-like hold on her waist. "Jungkook, look at yourself," he commanded, his voice dark with authority. He tilted her head to the side, forcing her to catch her own reflection in the darkened glass of the balcony door, silhouetted against the city lights. "Jungkook, look at what you've done to me. You are mine, only mine to look at, mine to touch, and mine to ruin. Tell me you know that. Tell me you know that. No one else is ever allowed to see you like this." He nipped at her shoulder, his teeth grazing the sensitive skin there, his touch becoming more demanding, more heavy. "Jungkook, be quiet now. Stop talking, stop running, and just let me remind you exactly who you belong to." A soft, broken sound escaped Taeyoung's throat the moment his hand grazed the sensitive skin at the edge of her blouse. It wasn't a protest. It was a surrender, a high, shaky moan that vibrated against the cool glass and was instantly swallowed by the darkness of the balcony. Jungkook reacted to the sound as if she had struck him. He let out a low, guttural noise in his chest, his grip on her waist tightening until he was sure he was leaving marks. He pressed himself even closer, leaving no space for air, his hips locking against her in a slow, rhythmic sway that forced her to arch back into him. "Jungkook, that's it," he whispered, his voice dangerously thick. He tracked the movement of her breath, his lips grazing the shell of her ear as he traced the shape of it with his tongue. "Keep making that sound for me. I want you to make it louder." He moved his hand from her waist to her throat, his thumb tracing the frantic, fluttering pulse beneath her skin. He leaned into her back, his heavy, solid presence anchoring her, his breath hot against her shoulder. "Taeyoung, K-Kook, .. She gasped, her head falling back against his shoulder as his touch grew more demanding, his fingers sliding lower, teasing the skin where her sari was most undone. "Jungkook, I'm right here," he promised, his tone vibrating with a mix of possessiveness and relief. "I'm not going anywhere, and you aren't going to have enough voice left to argue with me by the time I'm finished." He took her breath away entirely, his lips finding the curve of her neck, nipping and kissing the sensitive skin with a hunger that bordered on savage. He didn't just want her attention. He wanted her completely unraveled, her composure shattered under the weight of his touch. Every time she whimpered, a tiny, helpless sound that echoed in the quiet room, his hands moved with more intensity, his palms branding her skin, his body demanding hers to meet his pace. He didn't care about the world outside, the city lights, or the hours that had passed. There was only the sound of her gasping breaths and the desperate, magnetic pull that had finally, violently brought them back to each other. The air between them was thick with a frantic, consuming energy, the kind that left no room for hesitation. Jungkook's hands, still burning from the touch of her bare skin, tightened around her waist. With a swift, fluid motion, he spun her around, and before she could even steady her shaky legs, he scooped her up into his arms, bridal style. Taeyoung gasped, her arms instinctively flying up to loop around his neck, her fingers tangling into his hair as she clung to him. She was breathless, her eyes glassy and dilated, her heart drumming against her ribs in a wild, erratic rhythm. He didn't wait for a response or a second thought. He strode toward the bed in 3 long, heavy strides, his eyes never leaving hers, a predatory, dark intensity that made her entire body tremble. He reached the center of the plush mattress and didn't just place her down, he threw her back, his arms releasing her at the last possible second. Taeyoung landed amidst the tangled linens, her body bouncing wildly against the soft surface, the red silk of her sari spreading out around her like a sprawling, chaotic bloom. She looked up at him, her hair fanned out across the pillows, her breath coming in ragged, audible hitches. Jungkook didn't pause. His movements were jagged and hurried, fueled by a desperation he hadn't felt in years. He tore at the gold fastenings of his sherwani, the buttons flying loose and clattering against the hardwood floor. He pulled the heavy fabric off his shoulders with a frustrated huff, his chest heaving as he threw the garment aside. It hit the floor with a dull thud, joining the discarded mess of their evening, leaving him standing there in just his undershirt, his silhouette sharp and imposing in the dim amber light. He looked down at her, his gaze sweeping over her, the disheveled sari, the exposed, flushed skin, the way she was staring up at him with a mix of awe and intoxicating need. "Jungkook, there's no more running now, Taeyoung," he rasped, his voice dropping to a low, warning rumble. "The judge is off the clock." He kicked off his shoes and moved toward the bed, the mattress dipping heavily under his weight as he climbed over her, his eyes locking onto hers, with a promise that made the rest of the world vanish. Jungkook didn't give her a moment to catch her breath. He descended onto her, his body acting as a weight that pressed her deep into the mattress. As soon as their lips met, it wasn't a soft exchange. It was a collision. They kissed with a frantic, starving intensity, as if they were trying to erase the memory of every argument, every cold word, and every hour of silence they had endured. Jungkook's mouth moved over hers with a demanding rhythm, his tongue sweeping against hers, tasting the lingering sweetness of the wine and the heated, salt-tinged flavor of her skin. Every time she tried to inhale, he deepened the kiss, his hands searching for purchase. He gripped her waist, again his thumbs digging into the soft flesh of her sides, pulling her hips flush against his own until there was no barrier left between them but the tangled, ruined silk of her sari. Taeyoung made a low, needy sound in the back of her throat, her fingers clawing at the muscles of his back, pulling him closer, wanting to dissolve into him. She was lost in the friction, the heat of his chest against her sensitive skin, the rough stubble of his chin brushing against her jawline, and the way he seemed to be drinking in her very soul. He pulled back for a fraction of a second, his forehead resting against hers, both of them gasping for air. His eyes were dark, dilated, and scorched with a possessive fire that made her blood hum. "Jungkook, I've been dying for this," he rasped, his voice vibrating against her lips. "I've been dying to have you all to myself, without the world, without the noise, just us." He didn't wait for her to answer. He dove back down, his kiss turning hungrier, more desperate. He pressed his hand against the small of her back, arching her body upward to meet his, while his other hand moved with purpose, finally pushing aside the heavy, chaotic folds of her sari to find the skin he had been craving to touch all night. The contact of his palm against her bare skin sent a shudder through her that shook the bed, and Jungkook answered the tremor by deepening his hold, his kiss growing more savage, more absolute. The rhythm of the room was frantic, a storm of desperate, hungry kisses and the sharp intake of breath. But as Jungkook's hand slid further, feeling the frantic, uneven heat of her skin, a sudden, cold wave of clarity washed over him. He felt the slight, unsteady sway of her head beneath his, and the way her responses, while eager, carried the haze of the alcohol he had watched her consume throughout the night. Jungkook froze. His hands, which had been mapping the curves of her waist with possessive intent, suddenly went still. He felt the weight of his own actions crashing down on him. "She's drunk," the thought roared in his head, overriding the raw hunger that had been driving him. "This isn't who we are. I can't take advantage of her in this state." With a strang-led groan of protest against his own desire, Jungkook pulled back, his shoulders bunching as he tried to create space between them. "Jungkook, no. Wait." He began to shift his weight to the side, his eyes filled with a pained, protective guilt. He gripped her shoulders, trying to gently ease her back, down against the pillows. "Jungkook, we shouldn't do this." Not like this. You're drunk, and I don't want you to regret anything tomorrow because I was too weak to stop. But he had severely underestimated her. Taeyoung didn't even blink. The moment she felt him pulling away, her eyes darkened with a stubborn, tipsy determination. Before he could fully roll off the bed, she moved with a fluid, surprising strength. She lunged forward, her hands hooking into his shirt, and slammed her lips back onto his, effectively silencing his protests with a kiss so hungry and desperate that it made his head spin. Taeyoung, don't you dare stop, she whispered against his mouth, her voice a low, raspy command. She didn't give him a chance to breathe. She maneuvered her body, her legs, sliding over his hips until she was hovering directly above him. The shift in her position, the way she pressed her weight down onto him made Jungkook's breath hitch in his throat, his resolve fraying instantly. Jungkook, TA, listen to me, he gasped, his hands coming up to her waist to try and push her back, his voice thick with a mix of frustration and longing. You aren't yourself. You're drunk, baby. Please. Taeyoung, I know exactly who I am. She silenced him again, her lips trailing fire down his jawline to the sensitive spot beneath his ear. She shifted her hips, creating a friction that sent a jolt of pure lightning through his system. She looked down at him, her hair cascading over her shoulders, her expression one of intoxicating, unbridled need. She settled herself firmly on top of him, straddling his lap, her hands pinning his wrist to the mattress above his head. She leaned down, her chest brushing against his, and kissed him again, a deep, devouring claim that left no room for his conscience to breathe. Taeyoung, I don't care about the wine. I don't care about anything. You're my husband, and I want you. Stop being a good man for 1 second, and just be mine. Jungkook groaned, his fingers curling into the mattress, the last of his resistance shattering under the weight of her persistence and the sheer, overwhelming reality of her right there on top of him. Jungkook's hands, which had been desperately trying to maintain a boundary, finally went limp against the mattress. He realized with a shattering certainty that he couldn't win this battle against her, not when she was looking at him with such unfiltered, intoxicated need. The sound of her voice, the weight of her body straddling his, and the sheer desperation in her touch had completely bypassed his logic. He let out a long, ragged exhale, his eyes fluttering shut as he surrendered. He loosened his grip on her wrists, and instead, his hands slid down to clasp her waist, his fingers splaying wide to anchor her firmly against him. Jungkook, fine, he groaned, his voice barely a tremor. But you're the one who started this, Taeyoung. Don't blame me when you can't run anymore. Taeyoung didn't seem to hear his warning. She was entirely lost in the instinct of the moment. She pressed her weight down on him, her lips finding the sharp, clean line of his jaw. She kissed the stubble there with a soft, hungry pressure, her tongue tracing the heat of his skin, moving with a slow, deliberate intensity that made his muscles coil in anticipation. She trailed her kisses lower, moving from his jaw to the corded, sensitive muscles of his neck. Her lips found the hollow where his pulse thundered, and she began to suck against the skin there, creating a deliberate, lingering suction. The pressure was firm, a hot, wet friction that sent a violent jolt of electricity straight to Jungkook's core. Jungkook's head fell back against the pillows, his throat working convulsively, as he let out a low, involuntary Moana guttural sound of pure, unadulterated desire. His fingers dug into the small of her back, his knuckles turning white, his body arching upward to meet her. Jungkook, he swore under his breath, a sharp, ragged curse that was half prayer, half demand. His jaws set tight, his eyes snapping open to stare at the ceiling as he fought the urge to flip her over and take control of the pace. He was sweating now, his chest heaving, his entire frame strained to the point of breaking. He was controlling his movements, forcing himself to stay still, to be the foundation for her exploration, even as every nerve ending in his body screamed for him to let go. Taeyoung moved her lips lower, trailing a path of wet, searing kisses down his throat, her hands roaming his shoulders, feeling the tension vibrating beneath his skin. Every time she nipped at his collarbone, Jungkook's hips gave a sharp, spasmodic twitch. He was a man holding back a tidal wave, his teeth gritted, his breath coming in shallow, tortured hitches as he endured the exquisite, maddening torture she was inflicting on him. He was silent now, save for the hitching of his breath, focusing every ounce of his willpower on not crushing her under him, on not letting his raw, primal hunger finally overtake the protective, guilty instinct he had been trying to uphold. He was completely at her mercy, and the intensity of the sensation was threatening to undo him entirely. Taeyoung was relentless, her movements guided by a raw, uninhibited instinct that bypassed any sense of hesitation. She shifted her weight, grinding slowly against him, the friction of her body against his chest and hips making Jungkook's vision swim. She moved her mouth back up to his neck, finding the same spot again, and this time she lingered, her suction deliberate and heavy. Jungkook's hands, which had been anchoring her waist, slid upward, his fingers tangling into her hair, pulling her slightly back so he could see her face. His own face was flushed, a sheen of sweat coating his forehead, his dark eyes burning with a mixture of agony and adoration. "Jungkook, Tia, you have no idea what you're doing to me," he gasped, his voice sounding like broken glass. He didn't pull her away this time. Instead, he tilted his head to give her more access, his own control fraying into a dangerous, jagged mess. "Taeyoung, then show me," she challenged, her voice a sultry, intoxicated whisper. She leaned down, her hair falling like a curtain around them, shielding them from the rest of the world. She kissed the pulse point at his neck one more time, hard enough to leave a mark, before trailing her tongue along the curve of his throat. Jungkook's back arched off the mattress, a sharp, ragged sound escaping his lips, a moan and a desperate, half-strangled plea for her to stop, or perhaps to never stop. His hands moved from her hair to her back, his palms roaming over the bare, smooth skin exposed by her shifted blouse. He pulled her down hard until her chest was pressed completely against his, feeling the frantic, synchronized thumping of their hearts. "Jungkook, you're testing me," he hissed, his jaw clenching as he fought to remain steady. "You're really, really testing me, baby." Taeyoung only smiled, a slow, intoxicatingly confident expression that made his heart stutter. She shifted her hips again, a slow, rhythmic movement that nearly broke his composure entirely. Jungkook lay pinned beneath her, his body a battlefield of tension he had made. His choice: he would endure the exquisite, maddening torture she was inflicting, letting her lead the dance while he remained the immovable foundation. Every ounce of his focus was poured into maintaining a semblance of control, his hands hovering, then gripping the mattress, his knuckles white as he watched her with eyes that were black with suppressed need. Taeyoung, emboldened by his stillness and fueled by the intoxicating haze of the wine, continued her systematic dismantling of his composure. She turned her attention to his undershirt, her fingers nimble and reckless. She tugged at the hem, pulling it up over his torso, her palms grazing his burning skin until she finally peeled it away. Once it was tossed aside, his chest was bare, his muscles corded and heaving with every ragged breath he took. Taeyoung didn't hesitate. She leaned down, pressing her lips against his chest, and then, with a slow, deliberate hunger, she latched onto his nipple. She suckled firmly, her teeth grazing the sensitive nub, her tongue swirling against it with a wet, heavy pressure. Jungkook let out a choked, desperate sound, his back arching off the bed as he squeezed his eyes shut. His resolve was brittle glass, shattering under the sheer intensity of the sensation. He swore under his breath a string of low, guttural curses as he forced his hands to remain at his sides, his chest muscles jumping spasmodically beneath her touch. Taeyoung shifted, climbing higher until she was straddling his hips. Her hands moved to her own blouse, her fingers fumbling with the safety pin at her shoulder. With a soft click, she freed it. The heavy, blood-red silk of her already loose from their earlier movements, surrendered to gravity. She let the fabric slide entirely off her shoulder, the vibrant silk pooling around her waist. In the dim amber light, the deep-cut neck of her blouse hung open. Unable to contain the swell of her skin, her breasts, heavy and flushed, rose and fell in rapid, shallow successions, the cleavage popping out in a display so daring it made Jungkook's mouth go dry. Her breathing was uneven, loud, in the quiet room, causing her chest to heave rhythmically, a mesmerizing, tormenting sight. Below the blouse, her midriff was exposed. Her tummy was soft, smooth, and shaped perfectly, her belly button a delicate indentation that caught the light as she moved. The rest of the blood-red saree remained draped low, clinging to the curve of her hips in a way that emphasized her every movement. Jungkook watched her, his throat bobbing as he swallowed hard. He was helpless, his body completely under her command. Jungkook, Tae, you really have no idea what you're doing to yourself, he rasped, his voice thick with a mixture of warning and pure, unadulterated longing. Enjoy this. Enjoy every second of it. Because as soon as this judge is sober, you are going to pay for this. I promise you, the punishment I have waiting, ... You won't be able to run from it. He tried to steady his breathing, but as she shifted her hips again, the friction sent a final, jarring shock through him. He let out a long, shuddering groan, a sound of absolute, agonizing helplessness, his head falling back onto the pillow as he finally succumbed to the overwhelming tide of his own desire. Taeyoung leaned down, capturing his lips in another searing, deep kiss before pulling back just enough to press her bare, popped-up cleavage directly against his face. The sudden contact was absolute torture. Jungkook's reaction was visceral. He let out a sharp, ragged gasp, his head arching back as a low, gravelly moan tore from his throat. His eyes widened, his hands clenching the sheets until his knuckles turned white as he was flooded with the sheer, overwhelming heat of her. The friction was maddening, and as her soft skin brushed against his lips, he couldn't stop the broken, needy sound that escaped him, a testament to how close he was to losing his mind. When she pulled away just as quickly, the sudden loss of contact felt like a physical blow. He let out a low, tortured groan of protest, his head falling back against the headboard, his eyes squeezed shut as he struggled to control his ragged, heavy breathing. Taeyoung, seemingly oblivious to the havoc she was wreaking, began to trail a pats of possessive, wet kisses across his chest. She moved with a drunken, feline grace, finding the sensitive skin of his shoulders and the hollow of his neck. She sucked hard against his collarbone, leaving a dark, blossoming hickey. As her lips worked against his skin, Taeyoung let out a soft, melodic moan of her own, a high, shaky sound that vibrated against his neck and fueled his desire even further. Hearing her moan back, Jungkook's resolve crumbled. He groaned again, deeper this time, a rough, guttural sound that rumbled in his chest, his hips twitching uncontrollably as he tried to remain still. She continued to mark him, her lips pressing and suctioning, and every time she did, they both let out soft, broken sounds, hers a hum of pleasure, his a desperate, swearing plea for self-restraint. But then, the intensity of the sensation, the combination of her uninhibited touch and the heavy, blurring haze of the alcohol finally caught up to her. Taeyoung's movements slowed. A slight, dizzy tremor passed through her body as the world began to tilt. Her breathing, which had been erratic and sharp, began to soften, her eyelids fluttering as the overwhelming rush of pleasure became too much for her tired, intoxicated mind to process. She let out a final, shaky sigh and slowly collapsed forward, burying her face into the curve of his neck. She was limp now, the fire in her movements replaced by a sudden, sleepy languor. She snuggled closer, her warm breath fanning against his skin, her cheek resting against his pulse point. "Taeyoung, kook, I love you," she whispered, her voice barely audible, thick with exhaustion and affection. She closed her eyes, the last of her energy spent, and drifted off into a deep, contented sleep right there against him. Jungkook lay perfectly still, his heart still thundering, his skin branded with the marks she had left as he wrapped his arms protectively around her, the air in the room thick with the sudden, heavy silence. The fierce, predatory tension that had held Jungkook captive for the last hour slowly evaporated, leaving behind a profound, aching tenderness as he felt the steady, rhythmic rise and fall of Taeyoung's breathing against his neck. The fire in his eyes softened, replaced by a gaze of such deep, protective adoration that it bordered on reverence. He moved with painstaking care, not wanting to disturb her sudden slumber. With gentle, steady hands, he lifted her limp frame and shifted her until she was lying comfortably on the other side of the bed. Her head settled into the plush pillow, her hair fanning out like a dark halo. He took a moment to just watch her, the flushed glow of her skin, the slight pout of her lips, and the fresh, dark marks she had left on his skin as a testament to her claim. Leaning down, he pressed a soft, lingering kiss to her lips, a stark contrast to the hungry, desperate collisions of earlier. It was a kiss of apology and devotion. "I love you too, sweetheart," he whispered, his voice a low, raspy velvet in the quiet room. He smoothed a stray lock of hair from her forehead, his touch feather-light. "And I'm so sorry for everything tonight. I never should have let it get to this point." He reached for the heavy plush duvet at the foot of the bed and pulled it up, covering them both. He tucked the edges in meticulously, creating a cocoon that shielded them from the cool night air of Seoul. Once they were settled, he pulled her back against his chest, fitting their bodies together like two pieces of a puzzle. He wrapped his arms around her, one hand coming to rest firmly against her waist, while his other hand splayed protectively over the soft curve of her tummy. He held her with a firm, grounding pressure, as if he were still afraid that if he relaxed his grip, she might vanish into the night. The heat of her skin against his provided him with a sense of completion he had been starved of for far too long. He buried his face in the crook of her neck, inhaling the intoxicating blend of her perfume, the faint scent of wine, and the unmistakable, comforting aroma that was uniquely hers. With her body anchored safely against his, the weight of the day finally fell away. Jungkook felt the frantic rhythm of his heart begin to sync with hers, slowing down until it matched the deep, rhythmic pulses of sleep. He held her tightly, his grip a silent promise that he was her harbor, and as the exhaustion of the evening claimed him, he drifted off, finally at peace with his world exactly where it belonged, in his arms. Even in their deep slumber, The intimacy of the evening remained unbroken. As the night deepened, Jungkook shifted only slightly, his arm tightening instinctively around Taeyoung's waist, as if his subconscious refused to let her go. He pressed his face deeper into the crook of her neck, his breath warming her skin, seeking the grounding comfort of her presence to banish the lingering tension of the night. Taeyoung, lost in the heavy, dreamless haze of her exhaustion, responded with the natural, unthinking grace of deep sleep. She curled further into the warmth of his chest, her hand coming up to rest over his arm that was draped across her tummy. Her fingers twitched once, a faint, lingering response to his touch, before relaxing completely into the mattress. They moved in perfect synchronization, two bodies learning to breathe together after the storm. Every time Taeyoung shifted, Jungkook mirrored her, adjusting his hold to ensure she remained cradled against him, his thumb rubbing small, soothing circles into the side of her waist. The silence of the room was filled only by the soft, rhythmic sound of their shared breathing, a quiet harmony that replaced the earlier chaos. In the dim light of the Seoul night, they remained a single, inseparable shape, a promise held firm through the darkness. The protective grip Jungkook maintained on her tummy and waist was unwavering, a silent anchor that kept her safe in his hold until the first light of dawn would eventually find them, still tangled together, exactly where they belonged.